Agut in my Rabbi Sai. Lili Nishmasi Mimirosirus Bas Mordechai. Live from the MDY Sukkah. Zog the Gemara. Omer Rav Chizda, Dover Zeh Mitoris Moshe Rabbeinu Le'Lemadnu. That are Ariel, that performs the Avodah in the Beis Hamikdash is Avodah Apostle. Omer Rav Chizda, Dover Zeh Mitoris Moshe Rabbeinu Le'Lemadnu. It's not in the Torah. Midivri Yecheskel ben Buzi Le'Madnu. We have it in Navi, in Yecheskel. It says in the Pasuk called Benechar Ariel. Ariel is somebody who's a mummer, doesn't believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ariel Basar is an Ariel that doesn't have a bris milah. Lo Yavel Mikdash L'Shorseini. Rashi is always l'shitasi that the Ariel Basar means somebody who his brothers died. He's a shaygig, like he can't help it because his brothers already died during a milah, so he's not going to risk it. He doesn't have to risk it. Nevertheless, he can't perform the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. How do you know that this ruins the avodas Beis Hamikdash? It passes it. Okay, so it says that's lechalel, it ruins the avodah. Tana Rabbana. Benechor yochol benechor mamish. I would think that it means a non-Jew, benechor, like a nachri. Tamaloymar Ariel. No, it's somebody that has a problem with his heart. And came out Tamaloymar Benechor. So why does it say? Why does he use the lashon of stranger? It means that he's a stranger to the Rebbeinu Shalom. He doesn't believe in Hashem. He's a stranger to Hashem. How do you know that if he doesn't have a bris, he passes that? I need both. Somebody that's a mummer and somebody that has a physical arla. One, because I would say, okay, if he doesn't have a bris, so he himself is mos, he's repulsive. But a person who his body is fine, just his mind is messed up. So I would think that somebody like that could perform the avodah. If he performs the avodah, it doesn't ruin it. That it ruins it. And if I talk about just a mummer, it makes a lot of sense. Look, his heart is in the wrong place. He doesn't have the kavana. We know everything's about kavana. Everything's about kavana. Utzrichi. We said this already. So it makes a lot of sense that a koifer, a mummer, who doesn't have his heart in the right place, he's not thinking that he's bringing a carbon to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he's out. His avodah is possible. But somebody that doesn't have bris milah, he wants to get a bris milah. What should he do? That his two brothers died. His avodah is possible. Brand new sugi Rabbi say. Tomei possible. It's over ziknei darim. So there's a taisvas on Amud Aleph that tells us who ziknei darim are. He doesn't really tell us, but he says that l'chayra ziknei darim are tanaim, and if they're tanaim, they could argue on a mishnah, they could argue on other tanaim, and then he says perhaps they're amoraim. Okay, ziknei darim, the elders of the south. So it goes like this, Rabbi say. First of all, we all know this concept called tuma hutra betzibur. That's concept number one, and that is that when most of Klal Yisrael, 51% of Klal Yisrael is tamei, and they can't bring a carbon, let's talk about a carbon Pesach. They are tamei, they can't bring a carbon Pesach. So the Kohanim in the Beis Hamikdash could perform the Avodah and bring the carbon Pesach. There's another Tumah Hudru B'Tzibur, and that is what if most of the Kohanim are tamei? Klal Yisrael is good, but the Kohanim went to their rabbis, Levaya, and 51% of them are tamei. That's another type of Tumah Hudru B'Tzibur. Okay, now, when do we say Tumah Hudru B'Tzibur? When Klal Yisrael or the Kohanim went to Levaya? What about if they didn't go to Levaya? What if they touched the dead mouse? They all touched the dead mouse. 51% there's a whole magef of mice, and they all touched mice. Dead mice. Then what? So, Ziknei Darim say a fascinating thing. We don't really hold like them. Nevertheless, they say pshat here. When the Mishnah says that somebody who's tamei cannot perform the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, It's not talking about somebody who's tamei through touching a dead person and going to a funeral. That would be okay. That kind of avodah is not a problem. Why? Because there's a concept called tum hudru b'tzibur. Since if 51% of the Klal Yisrael went to levaya, we let it slide. They could bring the carbon pesach today. So if only one person went to a funeral, the kohen himself went to a funeral, and he messed up and he forgot and he performed the avodah, so we're going to let it slide, because in the family of going to a funeral, we see that a kohen is okay. Why? When Roiv of Klal Yisrael go to a funeral, it's okay. So, b'diavad, if one kohen went to a funeral and he performed the avodah, it's also okay. Masha Enkein, but if we're talking about a sheretz, there's no such a heter of 51% of Klal Yisrael going to touching a sheretz. So if there's no heter to perform the avodah on a sheretz, so there's no heter if a kohen performs the avodah by mistake after stepping on a dead mouse. If he performs the avodah, we're not going to let it slide, because in the family of sheretz that doesn't exist. Yeah, understood? Simple enough. So says the Gemara, what the Mishnah says that tamei is possible, a kohen is no good, is talking about a sheretz. If he touched a dead person, which is mamish. In Hebrew, there's a good line. I don't know how to say it in English. Afuch al afuch, the opposite on the opposite. Like it's counterintuitive in English. Oh, that's even better maybe than afuch al. Counterintuitive. If you touch a very severe tumah like a dead person, then we're going to let it slide. If you touch a little shvach mouse, we're not going to let it slide. Why is a dead person more tamei, more severe than? How do we know it's more severe than a sheretz? But why? Well, what's the logic behind it? So the Gemara tells us what the logic is. Let's see. Because think about it. How long are you tamei when you go to levaya? How long do you remain tamei? 7 days, and you have to do a whole purification system. You have to get sprinkled by the paraduma twice. By sheretz, how long are you tamei by sheretz? That day. That's it. Only that day. So, our Mishnah is talking about a kohen who touched a dead mouse, because if you touch a dead person, say ziknei darim, you're fine. We're going to let it slide. Since there's a concept of tumah hudra b'tzibur, that if a large amount of Klal Yisrael, the majority of Klal Yisrael, they are tamei, you could bring the carbon. So too, we'll say that a person touched a dead person, if a kohen touched a dead person and he performed the avodah, it's going to be okay. B'diavad. But what time is it? It's 17 minutes in, but what time is it? Because the Israelis have to think about that. What? Oh, so we have another 30 minutes. Okay. Asked the Gemara, so a kohen who's tamei, by touching a dead sheretz, he should for sure be able to perform the avodah b'diavad. If he did the avodah, we're going to let it slide. Why? Because Tmei Meis is much worse than you let it slide, so certainly Tmei Sheretz. What's the Kavachomer? Matmei Meis. Shetan Azosh Lishu Shvi. When a person touches a dead person, the dead person is the Avi Satuma. It's the top level of Tum. Nothing is more Tum than that. So he has to go through this process of 7 days of Tumah. And on the 3rd and the 7th day gets sprinkled. Nevertheless, Miratza, you can bring a carbon tzibur. When the tzibur brings karbanos, if they're all tamei mace, you could bring it. We let it slide. So somebody who's tamei from a sheretz that does not require to get sprinkled on the 3rd and 7th day, and udim sheretz, certainly it should work. Says the Gemara, another chiddush from Ziknei Darim, Kesari Ziknei Darim, Mechaprim Kemiskaprim. You can't make such a kavalchaimer. Why? A mechaper and a miskaper. What's a miskaper? Miskaper is somebody that gets the kapara. Who's that? The person that owns the carbon. He brings the carbon. He's called a miskaper. What's a mechaper? The person performing the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, otherwise known as a kohen. So you have to learn the kohanim from the Israelim or the owners of the karbanos. They have to be the same. They're mentioned in the same pasuk. It's a hekesh. You learn one from the other. That what? Mamiskaprim Tomei Meis in Tmei Sheretz Loi. Just like the person who gets the kapara, he only gets the kapara when he's Tomei, if he's Tomei through a dead person, not Tomei through a sheretz. And we're going to explain why. You hear this? If somebody is Tomei from a sheretz, he cannot, you don't have any kind of heter to do a carbon for him. Why? We could go through it now and go through it again. Because there's no need to. There's zero need to. Why? Think about it. How long is a person tamei if he touches a sheretz? Just that day. So let's say he touches a sheretz at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. He jumps into the mikvah at 12:01, and he becomes tar what time? At shkia. So let's say he has to bring a carbon pesach, and it's erev pesach. He touched the sheretz by mistake. Shlam mazel. He's careful the whole year. Punkt that day that he has to eat the carbon pesach. He touches the sheretz. What does he do? He gives his carbon to his neighbor. He says, go bring this to the Beis HaMikdash. Meanwhile, he jumps into the mikvah at 12 o'clock. At 12:01, he's already called a Tful Yom. And at night, when it's time to eat the carbon Pesach, he's ready to go. So why should I make a special heter to allow him to eat the carbon when I don't need to make a heter? He could eat it anyway. There is no concept of Tuma Hutra B'tzibur when it comes to the sheretz. But if he touched a dead person, and most of the Klal Yisrael went to Rebbe Ovadia Yosef's Levaya, and they all touched the Aron as it was going by, and they're 51% of Klal Yisrael, and now what are they going to do? 51% of Klal Yisrael is going to wait for Pesach Sheni? They can't do that. So we say Tumah to receiver, they could all bring the carbon even though they're on day one of their Tumah. So he says, Mamas carbon to me sint, sheretz loy, the Bailam, the Yisrael, could only bring a carbon betuma when he's the severe tuma of mace, not tmei sheretz loy, not if he's coming from a sheretz. Af mechaprim. So too, that's what we're talking about right now. The kohen who's performing the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, it only works. Mechaprim tmei mace in, tmei sheretz loy. It only works when the kohen touched the dead person, then we'll let it slide. We're not going to let it slide if he touches a sheretz. So, if you think about it, somebody who touched a dead person and he's on his 7th day, in other words, that night he's going to be tar, he's exactly on the same level as somebody that touched the sheretz. Yeah. He doesn't need to come on to the special heter of Tumah B'tzibur because he's on his final day, and that night anyway, he's going to be eating the carbon Pesach beheter on his own because the sun went down. Says Gemara, Michael Sarvi. So this is, we already discussed this, so this is simple for us. What do they hold? If somebody touched a dead rat, there's two ways to look at it. You cannot shecht a carbon pesach for him. Why? Because right now he's Tomei sheretz. We don't hold that. I already explained that we hold that you could shecht. I'll prove to you that they don't hold that. Why? Because then if most of Klal Yisrael touched this dead rat, then why can the kohanim perform the avodah for them? Because if a single person you cannot check the carbon pesach for him right now, tzibur avde betuma. Then if 51% of the Klal Yisrael is tummy from that tuma, we would do it. How come we don't do it? It must be that we hold that tumas sheretz is different than tumas adam. Tumas sheretz is because anyway the sun is going to go down. You're going to be tar on your own. There's no need for me to make a heter for the kohen to perform the avodah for you. Why? Because I'm going to perform the avodah right now. I'm going to shecht your carbon pesach even though you're very, very tamei. But since anyway you're going to be tar tonight when you're able to eat it, then it's a good. So we said this, right? We learned this. Says Ula, what an interesting lashon. He did a tkiyah shofar. He objected. He was upset about this ziknei darim. I don't understand something. What has more power to push off tumah? The Yisrael that's bringing his carbon, whoever it is bringing his carbon, or the kohanim? The owner of the carbon has more power than a kohen. Why? Because
individual could bring his carbon even though he's tamei. When he has tamei sheretz, he just sends his carbon with the kohen, with his friend to the Beis Hamikdash, and we shecht it. Whereas the kohen, when he himself is tamei, cannot do the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. So you see that the person who is receiving the kapara has more power than the person giving the kapara, and therefore what? Listen to this Kavachaymer. The Gemara explains it word for word what I just said. When the owner, he became a tamei, he touched a rat, he's allowed to send his carbon. Yet a kohen who became tamei with the sheretz cannot perform the avodah. So, but in a place where the person receiving the kapara touched the dead person, there's no way you send your carbon. So let's say you have a carbon of Pesach carbon Pesach, and you cannot bring your carbon to the Beis Hamikdash. Why? Because Nebuch, you went to a funeral. So what do? Rabbi said, what do? It's a trick question. Everybody knows the answer, yet nobody could think of the answer. What do? You Pesach Sheni. You bring the carbon in the second Pesach. Right now, you can't bring it. So certainly, if the one receiving the kapara can't bring his carbon to the Beis Hamikdash when he touches a dead person, certainly the kohen shouldn't be able to perform the avodah. Yet Ziknei Darim say that a kohen who's tamei meis could perform the avodah. Remember why? Because if you could perform the avodah b'tzibur, so we're going to let it slide b'yachid also. It doesn't make sense, he says. Says the Gemara, not true. A person who went to a funeral could send his animal to the Beis Hamikdash, and it'll be yoytze b'diavad. No, b'diavad. If he didn't tell people about it, or if he didn't know about it, and he didn't know that he's tamei, and he didn't realize that he touched the thing, and then he found out later, we'll let it go, and we're not going to make him do it again. Sorry, let's go back. Ziknei Darim hold that a person who's Tmei Meis could send his carbon to the Beis Hamikdash. But it says before in the pasuk, Ish Kiyeh Tamei Ve'asa Pesach B'Chodesh Hasheni. There's a Pesach Sheni for that purpose. L'mitzvah. That's the best way to do it. Ish Lefi Achloi. Oh, it says in the pasuk that you could only be part of this carbon if you're going to eat from it. Remember, we all remember, what do we remember? That famous thing that the old man with his teeth, if you can't check the carbon paste for somebody that doesn't have teeth even. So if you're a Tmei Meis, like we're talking about it right here, he's Tmei Meis and he sends his carbon into the Beis Hamikdash, how? He's like a guy that doesn't have teeth, he can't eat it right now, he can't eat. If you're telling me he can't eat it, so how could he check it for you? Says Gemara law, le-mitzvah. Yeah, that's only le-mitzvah. They hold it's a mitzvah. If you want to do it the best, then you should be able to eat. But if you can't eat, you're also yaitza. Ask Gemara, what are you telling me that it doesn't pass the carbon? But Tanya, b'michsas nefashos. Oh, there's a concept in Masechtas Pesachim, learned very extensively about it, that in order to eat from a carbon Pesach, you have to be on a list. You go around, I'm not going to be able to eat the whole thing, you're not going to be able to, so let's partner up. I'll take this part, you'll take that part. And if you're not a monui, if you're not on the list, no good. So, says the Gemara, and what if you shecht it? You shecht the carbon Pesach for somebody that's not on the list. You'll think, okay, yes, we didn't do it, it's a chumrah. We're going to see it in Kachim a lot. When the Torah repeats itself twice, it means this is for real. This is not a joke. It says it twice. Let me see if I have it here. Yeah, here we go. B'michsas, tachaisu. 2 words that are the same meaning to teach us. If you're not on the list, do not eat. So just like you only shecht for somebody who's on the list, so too somebody that could eat it. And if you cannot eat, why can't you eat? Because you're Tmei Meis, then you cannot shecht for him. Just like you can't shecht for somebody that's not on the list, so you cannot shecht for somebody who can't eat. Ziknei Darim loy makshi. It's not a question. They don't have this hekesh between a manui and a oichel. So if you can't eat, and I shecht for you, not the end of the world. Says Gemara, even if they don't hold this section, but I have another pircha. Why? Ken tzadikim lamot shama lo liyadi. זה מפריע לעיניים. ומה במקום שניתנו בעלים בשרץ, שמשחררים גם מסיים לכתחילה. When a person becomes tamei, he himself, the owner of the carbon, became tamei from a sheretz. The halach is what shemshachrim gonna lechatchila. So we're doing the same exact kavachayim that we said before, so you all know it. We're just adding one word, lechatchila. I could send my carbon in the first place without any worries, even though I'm tamei sheretz. Why? Because tonight I'm going to be completely tar and I can eat it lechatchila. Koyim shinit sheretz. And yet the same tumah. When a kohen is tamei from a sheretz, he cannot perform the avodah. So makim shenim b'aylam b'meis. When the b'aylam touched that person, they went to levaya. Shem shachim g'nesem lechatchila. They cannot. Before we answered, oh, you could. The Ziknei Dorim hold that if he sent the carbon after the fact, it's okay. No. I'm now sticking in the word lechatchila. They cannot send it in the first place. Certainly, how do you Ziknei Dorim say that a kohen who performs the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash when he went to a funeral, it's okay, we're going to let it slide? No way. Simple logic tells you that it shouldn't be like that. Okay, so end of that. Meisvei. And now we have a question on Ziknei Dorim. What does Ziknei Dorim say? That if a kohen who's tamei, by going to a funeral, he performs the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash by mistake, we're going to let it slide? We have a question. Hatzitz miratz al tumas dam. We don't have to understand everything here. We have to understand the next part. We're talking about a nazir. We're talking about a carbon pesach. A nazir is a person who says, I'm going to refrain from drinking wine and grapes. And at the end of the 30 days, or however long he took it upon himself, he has to bring karbanos, and there's a whole process. Carbon pesach, we know what that is. Tzitz, this is the tzitz. The kohen gadol wears it. Oh, I should have shown that picture. Geschmack picture from Eliyahu Shalom. I have to get Rishus though. The tzitz, the reason why the kohen gadol wears this is to give a kapara for all the problems that they had in the Beis Hamikdash from tumah. Tumas dam, the tumah of the blood. Ve'enatzitz miratzo al tumas haguf. But we're talking about, says the Gemara, we're talking about the owner here. And it won't give, it doesn't help if somebody's tamei in his body. B'mai, what kind of tumah are we talking about? If we're talking about just they touched a rat. We said that not only that, you could lechatchila go and check for him. We're talking about somebody who went to Levaya. Vikatani, and it's miratzo. And we said that the tzitz doesn't help. Alma nitmu ba'alim b'meis, ei mishachim g'rnisayim. Here's a question on Ziknei Dorim over here. It seems like you cannot send your carbon and you have to wait for Pesach Sheni. Loi. Says, well, no. If we're not talking about that, because if the owner became tamei meis, you're right, that tzitz is miratza. That's like in our Mishnah, that the kohen who performs the avodah after you touch the sheretz, according to Ziknei Dorim, apostle. Actually, everybody holds that. If the kohen touches the sheretz, the avodah is apostle. But wait a minute, it doesn't really jive with the seifa. So here's a very cool halacha. A lot of us didn't know about this halacha until tonight, so it's geschmack. There's something called tumas hatahaim. Did anybody hear of tumas hatahaim? No? Great. So we're learning a big chiddush. Tumas hatahaim means a tumah that nobody was aware of before. Okay? There's a dead person that an avalanche covered him once upon a time, and people, oh, here, we have a video. Vada. Here we go. So now it became red. Why? Because he just went over a dead person. But here's the thing. Since that dead person is unknown, nobody ever knew that he's buried there. Only later on, years later, when the snow melted, they found the body there. So Mela, everything that people did there before, it's an unknown tumah, so we let it go. All their karbanas, the carbon pesach, everything, we let it go. So, let's see what it says over here. Could it make sense that we're talking about the kohen? Before we thought we were talking about the owner. And now we're talking about the kohen that's performing the avodah. Wait a minute, how's it go with the tahim? Hatzitz miratza. The tzitz lets it go by. It's only when a dead person is buried under the avalanche. To come to exclude what? What if a dead rat is buried under there? No.
It doesn't come to be miratza that. So the Gemara, no. Loi lemuti tumas atoim de ziva. We're talking about that. Oh, so real quickly, because the Israelis are coming, but we have to talk about ziva for a second. Ziva is when something comes out of his body, and if it only comes out once, it's like he's a balkari. It's like it's a disease that made this happen. If it comes out twice, he becomes a real zav, a zav gadol. 3 times, he becomes a zav gadol, but he has to bring a carbon. And he has to wait 7 days. 7 days of tara. Now, 3 times or 2 times means once, and then there's a break, and then another time, or on 2 different days. So what happens if a person has a ziva from before Shkia, a very, very long emission, a very long ziva, and it goes all the way after Shkia? Is that considered 2 days or 1 day? The answer is it's considered 2 days because it's a long ziva. But what if a guy had a ziva during Ben Hashmashas for 20 seconds during Ben Hashmashas, and now you don't know if it belongs to the Sunday or the day afterwards, Monday? So that's a suffix, and that's Tumas HaTahim of Ziva. So we're not coming to exclude a Sheres, we're coming to exclude the Tumas HaTahim of a Ziva. A Kohen who's performing the Avodah on a Nazir and a Karban Pesach. He had a question, he didn't know how to answer it. Does the Tumas HaTahim work here or not? Do you say it's okay or not okay? Based on what you're telling me, we're talking about the Kohen performing the Avodah. You see from here that Tumas HaTahim works. So the Gemara says you're right. The Rami Bar Chama Vadi Plig, of course, Ziknei Darim are going to argue on Rami Bar Chama because he holds that this is talking about the owner, not the Kohen. But they hold it's talking about a Kohen, so they argue with each other. Fine. Toshma. We have a kasha now on Rami Bar Chama. What does Rami Bar Chama say? That a Karban Pesach, when the owner is Tamei Meis, is possible. So he says, V'nasa Aroin. These guys are talking behind me. It says that the tzitz is meratza. How? What exactly does it come to forgive? Daf Yomi Amud Beis. Pigul hari nemar. So this is a tricky thing. I once said it in Shir. We're going to say it all the time. What does pigul mean? We know pigul to mean when the kohen thinks that he's going to eat the carbon, he's going to perform the zrika outside of its allotted time. But in the Torah, that's not what it means. In the Torah, it means outside of the allotted place. So that's what it means over here. Which means chutzlam kaimai. Harek v'nemar, the Torah already says lo yichashav. Lo yichashav. You're not going to get a kapara. Im avoy noisar. And over here, I made a mistake in the Hebrew. I did not prepare well on Friday because of the whole Sandekais and Friday. Not a good excuse, but I mamish didn't prepare well. Noisar over here does not mean noisar leaving it over. Noisar over here means the same thing that we always call pigul, which is thinking about chutz le zmanoi. That's what noisar over here means. Chutz le zmanoi. Oh, so what does it come? 1 minute before sponsors. The tzitz comes to give a kapara for tuma, not for noisar, not for pigul, not for chutz le zmanoi, but for tuma. And why? Because it's hutra meklal b'tzibur. Once in a while, we allow it to slide when the tzibur is tamei. So that's why we're mekel on it through the tzitz. My tuma. What kind of tuma we're talking about? Ilema tuma sharetz. Mituma sharetz we're talking about the dead rat. Hechi. So what does it mean hechi? Like we explained on Amud Aleph. There is no way in the world that you ever need a kohen to perform the avoid in the Beis Hamikdash when somebody touched the dead rat. Why? Because you just wait till that night and you become tar anyway. Elotum meis. Obviously, we're talking about a dead person. We're talking about the owner, not the kohen. So over here you see that you could send the carbon even though you went to Lavaya and you're Tamei. Ubemai, and what are we talking about? Ibn Nazir. Huh? Not lechatchila. Yeah, it's not lechatchila. Yeah, that it works with the Yevet. All these things are with the Yevet, basically. Ubemai, what are we talking about? Ibn Nazir, it certainly doesn't work with a Nazir. Why? You have to start all over. Everybody knows a Nazir who becomes Tamei. What's the halacha? Start all over. Eloi Pesach. You're talking about a guy that has a Pesach, and he sent his carbon, like Ari asked before, how, and the Gemara answers. He did it, but the Yevet. So, It's not like Rami Bar Chama. Says the Gemara, Lo'ilam b'sheretz. No, we're talking about a sheretz. V'shem tuma b'olam. You ask me, but a sheretz is no heter. What do you mean? The Brisa says that tuma hutru b'tzibur, and tuma hutru b'tzibur doesn't apply to sheretz. You're 100% right. It doesn't apply to sheretz. But the concept applies in the world. There is a concept called tuma hutru b'tzibur. Where? By a dead person. The Seder. So we threw it in there. Vika the daiko ma'isach, and some say the exact opposite. Avana kadoshim. Let's just finish this and we're done. And we'll be where the Hebrew is. Avana kadoshim. This is a riot to Rami Bar Chama, kasha on Ziknei Darim. It says Avana kadoshim. What's Avana kadoshim? The korbanos, the kachim. In Avana makdishim loy, it comes to be miratza for the carbon that's tamei, but not for the koyin that's tamei. My tuma, what kind of tuma are we talking about? Ilim tuma sheretz. Mishter b'tzibur. Sheretz is never mutter b'tzibur. Why? Because you wait till that night. Elo lav tumas meis. It's the tuma of the dead person. Avana kadoshim in. Avay Magdishim Loy, it says Mefurish. Not like the Ziknei Darim. That what? That the Kayin who's Tamei, Avay Magdishim Loy, he can't perform the Avodah. Says Gemara, no, Loy Lam Tumas Sheretz. Same kind of answer we said before. We're not talking about the Tumah Mace. We're talking, and that one, so therefore it's not a Kasha on Ziknei Darim. We're talking about Tumas Sheretz. Nothing to do with Ziknei Darim. Everybody agrees about Tumas Sheretz, he can't perform the Avodah. Why? V'shem Tumah Ba'olam. The Brisa brings this Tumah Hutru B'tzibur business, and that doesn't apply to Sheretz, so it makes more sense that we're talking about a mace. No, we're talking about a Sheretz. The reason why the Brisa brought Tumah Hutru B'tzibur is the concept exists in Tumah. Rabbi Isai, have a gewaldike Yom Tov Chalamoyed. Thank you for coming.
Merit the schus of spreading Torah throughout the world. Sponsor a shir today. MDYsponsor.com or sponsor at MDYDaf.com.